Are you looking for an internet talk radio station for your podcast? Look no further. At the helm of Passionate World Talk Radio are two women that want to provide a spot for you and your podcast to be heard. There are many other places for your podcast, but PWTR has the audience. You will not be disappointed. Our station has been on the internet for the past 16 years. Call us for more information. 484-364-1032 or text Jeannie White, station manager at THECONNECTSHOW@gmail.com for podcast show details. Welcome to Passionate World Talk Radio. Educate, enlighten, entertain.
Well, hello and welcome. My name is Sheila Wilson. I have a master's degree in public health. I have a bachelor's degree, and I'm a registered nurse. I am the president of Stop Healthcare Violence. I am a host on Passionate World Talk Radio. The name has been changed, just so that you folks realize this. We used to go by Wine and Cheese, but now it is Stop Healthcare Violence. Today, my guest is a nurse that has been in the psychiatric field for 47 years. 45 years of that is with psychiatric patients in the hospital and on an outpatient setting. Psychiatric nursing is very different from many of the jobs in the nursing field. Psychiatric nurses take care of patients that have mental illness. The patients are admitted or usually admitted to a psychiatric floor that specializes in mental illness. Our disclaimer is the views of the guest may not represent the views of the host or the station. So hello and welcome, Joan. How are you?
I'm well, Sheila. Thank you. How are you?
I am great. After our first 5 minutes of me trying to get back online, thank you for your patience. But sometimes it's not really very easy. But psychiatric patients, now as you probably know, I worked in the emergency room, and we saw a lot of psychiatric patients, and it was very difficult for them because if they were out of control, we would medicate them, and that was it. But we would try to get them into a psychiatric hold, and after an evaluation by, the best team or the psychiatric nurse, if there was one, and they could sit on a stretcher for 2, 3, 4 days and not get a bed. And it's really kind of painful to see that happen to a person. You come in, you have surgery, you're on that stretcher for maybe a couple of hours, and then you go right to the OR. Stuff like this. Now, the psychiatric field is that getting any better? Are there any open beds or any of the violence going on?
Well, there's always violence in psych. It's the nature of the work. In terms of open beds, the Department of Mental Health, at least in the Commonwealth, is always looking for beds. They've closed facilities for grievances that they had with them and things that they felt just made it unable to keep those facilities licensed and open. Then sometimes new companies or corporations will come in, pick up the actual physical building of it, or whatever, and start reopening it. But there's always a process that you have to go through to open any facility. So sometimes the number of beds comes and goes and changes. When Terra Vista was built in Devens, that was a new facility, and they were happy to have new beds. At the same time, they closed another facility that was in the greater Brookline, Mass area kind of thing. So beds come and go in psych. I think maybe more so sometimes than it does in medicine, because usually what happens with smaller hospitals, for the most part, but some corporation just comes in and swallows you up, and you just become one of one of their satellite facilities, I guess. That's less common in psych. Salem Hospital in Salem, Mass. opened up a great big facility over there. So those are additional beds, and there's a lot of flux in the number of beds in psych. There never seem to be enough for the number of patients who are out there, which is why people end up languishing in emergency rooms for long periods of time. And I guess I would say it's also true that sometimes when people are being referred to, not just the place that I work, but every other psych facility, if they're being overly violent and difficult to maintain and control in the emergency room, they're less likely to be accepted in certain psychiatric facilities who just don't have the capacity to handle that level of violence. It's frequently the case you have no security. It's just the nurses and the auxiliary staff working there. And when you bring somebody in that's extremely violent, there really isn't anybody physically there to contain them and control them. I mean, some hospitals have more male staff, and I know it's not socially acceptable to talk about gender differences, but, by and large, the male staff are just more physically capable of controlling violent males in particular, but also some of the women. Not that we women don't get involved, but if you don't have the adequate amount of staff to contain someone, people get hurt. They get permanently injured sometimes, and that's something obviously you want to avoid. And the more you have to struggle with someone who's out of control because you don't have the manpower, if you will, the person power to control them, they're also at risk of getting injured, and they do. So that's never an ideal situation.
Now, why wouldn't in the hospital, I spent 40 years in one particular hospital, but I had other jobs all over the time. I'd work part-time, and I had a great career. So, but looking at the hospital that I stayed at for 40 years, they had a group of security guards, not many. We had 7 floors and probably, maybe 50 patients on a floor. And the ER and plenty of other places that might need a security guard. But we didn't have a huge security guard, but we had security guards. And they would be able to manhandle a person and, tie him down if necessary. And then that all changed. And now the security guards, I think there is still the same amount, meaning 3 or 4 in that setting. But they're hands off.
That's correct. Mm-hmm. Everybody that I've worked with as a security person has told me that in the emergency room and stuff, they're considered hands off. They're not supposed to put hands on the patients anymore.
So, do you have any idea as to how that's helpful? I mean, if somebody is a problem with some psychiatric issue, and they see a security guard, that's not going to frighten them. So if
to be honest with you, it depends on what their mindset is at the time. I mean, it's frequently the case that when they see a security guard, it feeds into their state of paranoia, and it makes them more agitated, not less. I think where I work, we didn't originally have security guards. We certainly did when I was working in Everett, but, that was because it was a general hospital, and it was before security guards went hands off. But part of what I would observe in that general hospital setting was the security guards are not psychiatrically trained. And so when you're trying to control a patient who's out of control, what you don't want is to have it turn into a pig pile, when who knows who's going to end up on the bottom. And sometimes if you have people who are not psychiatrically trained or who are not skilled at de-escalation, that's often what happens. The facility where I work now, we didn't originally have security guards. Now we have, if we're lucky, we have 1 per shift. Right now, we don't have a day shift security person. We've got 1 person who works 3 to 11, 1 person who works nights, but that's 5 out of 7 days a week, and then there's no security. So they go through the same training that the auxiliary staff, the behavioral health assistants go through. The security guards go through all that same thing. They go through de-escalation training and all that stuff. So when they're working with us in a psychiatric setting, that's the focus of what they've been trained to do. Whereas, if you're working in a general hospital as a security person, you're covering all kinds of different things. And so our security guards are not hands-off, but they've also been specially trained to work in that psych setting so that they can be hands-on.
Well,
and does it always work? Well, sometimes it just makes the patients more agitated. If they see someone who looks like a police officer or a security person, they'll tend to target them. Sometimes they get right after them. Their paranoia just feeds right into that, and they see them as a threat. Sometimes they can talk through that with the person, depending on how skilled they are at de-escalating patients. And, sometimes you can't because they just are not going to see you as anything other than a threat to them.
When I worked in the detox field, in this one particular detox, which of course is closed now, they're all closed that I worked, she said, if any time a police officer has to come into the detox, do not let the crowd see him. And I says, why not? And she says, because he will be a threat. And I had never thought of that before. And you just said it yourself, that sometimes, especially if they're in uniform. So what about your male people? Do they just wear scrubs or whatever outfit that you wear?
Scrubs are street clothes. In psych, generally speaking, people wear street clothes. At one point, we had a DON who came out of a rehab setting, and she decided we should all wear scrubs. But part of that happened because the police, when they came in and they were doing an active shooter drill at one point in time, and they were asking patients for information because they couldn't tell the patients from the staff because everybody's wearing street clothes, even though staff have, lanyards with their badges on or whatever. When you're in a situation, even if you're just enacting an active shooter thing, it's like you're not going to stop and look around and see if somebody's got a name tag hanging on them. So it was one of the bits of feedback they reported back to the administration was it's really difficult to identify who the staff is and who the patients were. Then they enacted wearing scrubs. Now it's gone back to either or. So, I wear scrubs because to me it's like working in my pajamas, but some people choose to wear street clothes. That said, before we were made to wear scrubs, I had actually never owned a pair of scrubs. Because when I did med-surg nursing back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, I wore whites. White dress, white nylons, white shoes, nursing hat, the whole 9 yards. So, and after that, I was in psych. Yep, after that in psych. So I've been in street clothes since 1976 until I discovered scrubs. But for the most part, we won't find the vast majority of people in scrubs per se in psych. Although, to be honest with you, if you're taking someone down, loose scrub pants work great.
Oh yeah,
I've had chinos that split open in the back end on me a few times during a restraint. That's really awkward.
It is awkward. It's the scrubs are good, but people. I have a good friend that will complain about how the nurses all look like they're disheveled and everything else in scrubs. And I says, well, if you had somebody vomit or urinate on you, you don't like to be putting your uniform into the wash all the time. It's scrubs work very well because you can always get another pair.
Yeah. Exactly.
Oh, I see. But you really don't look good in scrubs. And what can you do? But that's what happens.
Yes, so if you're wallowing in human fluid.
Right. With your violence, do you get any, does anybody support you? You're in work tonight and you get hit or, a little smashed around, and you're not smashed around enough that you need to go home or go to the ER. Does anybody check on you? Does anybody say, hey, how did that how did it happen? Are you okay?
Well, there are a couple of responses to that, I guess, Sheila. The first thing is, number one, because I'm a supervisor, I'm usually out there in the middle of it all with everybody, but as soon as the situation is contained, whatever it takes to contain it, my responsibility then is to check in with all the staff. Sometimes it's obvious that someone's been hurt. I also have to make sure that if a patient's been injured, that also gets addressed. but so I am, or the other supervisors that are working, we're the first ones who have to then check in with the staff and say, how are you doing? What, and, what do you need? Blah, 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 depending on a lot of times the staff, they want to, be tough, and they say, no, I'm fine. And I'll say, look, you got scratched. I said, here's the thing. This person has poor hygiene. They haven't showered in the first week they've been here. Whatever is in their fingernails, you don't want that under your skin. If you end up with a cellulitis and you don't file a report of injury, you're not going to be covered. Even though it seems minor, you must fill out an injury report form because you need to. So, as someone who's overseeing the situation, it's my responsibility to check in on everybody, make sure that everybody is okay, make sure that anybody who even says, I got a bump on my this, that, or the other thing, it's like, fill out the paperwork, which then goes to HR, and there's a number that they're supposed to call immediately that's a nurse hotline thing that's attached to this. And we had somebody who got spit on in a restraint. I think it was Christmas weekend, or maybe it was the weekend before that, and he spit right in this nurse's eye. And that was a rude time to find out that they had removed all but 2 of the eye wash stations in the facility, because each floor used to have one, in which case now she had to run all the way to the staff break room before we could find one. And I then confronted someone in administration about that. Well, they decided that, this was enough. And I'm like, in what universe should someone who just got spit in their eye have to run through the whole hospital to get to an eye wash station? So that to me doesn't feel supportive. But, so there are varying levels of support, I guess, and it depends on who's working. Obviously, the administration is always informed if somebody's injured, patient, staff, either way. HR processes the paperwork. There's a nurse hotline that they effectively are encouraged to call, and then that nurse goes through a whole bunch of steps with them about what they should or shouldn't do and what kind of follow-up is recommended or what have you. And, obviously you can't make them call. I tell everybody who gets the paperwork, it's like, you're supposed to call this number. You should call it right away. I certainly made sure that the nurse who got spit in her eye called the number.
Right. You never know what's going to happen. When I was
possibly.
No, when you said spit in the eye, I had one of the nurses. This is like a nightmare because I can't remember very much, but she ended up, we were working with this patient who was calm, wonderful, not psych, they had a heart attack. It wasn't in a psych field, but she needed blood. And for some odd reason, she ended up pushing the syringe, and the blood went right into my mouth. that taught me to keep my mouth shut. But it's like, these things happen, and you don't know what's going to happen. And so it took a long time to get, first of all, to get somebody's blood into your mouth. I mean, it wasn't much, but it was just the thought of it.
That's so gross. Yeah.
It is.
So gross.
But, I mean, all these things happen in the field of wherever we are, and some of the things are more gross than that. But now, how is administration? I mean, you talked about, calling and doing a nurse's hotline and doing that. And I don't know, with you being like the supervisor, do you go into administration and tell them, tonight we had 3 assaults, 2 people, 2 of the nurses are fine, one is pretty bad. And
email.
Do they call?
I mean, we'll call it. Yeah, I call the DON if something like really radical happens. Otherwise, it's just an email that goes out to the DON and the CEO, and it's just sort of like, as long as we're there and we're handling it, that it's a notification to them. I mean, there was not too long ago a patient that required us to have the police there 4 times in one day. The police finally just said and that was only on that day. We'd had them there a couple of other times. And they finally slapped the person in handcuffs and took them to the emergency room and said, it's like, you clearly are not the facility that can handle him. And we were not offended. It's the truth. There was one day when the police, the day that they were called 4 times, they were all women working on that unit. There was one male staff person in the hospital. It's like you can't expect this person to throw himself on a sword because he's the only male in the building. That's, but sometimes that will happen where it's just a bunch of women and you have a super big, violent patient. It's like, we're not going to be able to contain them. So the police were being called, and they finally were just like, we're just taking him out of here. He needs to be reevaluated for a higher level of security than you can provide, which to me would have been like a turn at Bridgewater or something. But he ultimately ended up at another hospital. But I also know for a fact that that hospital has more male staff. They have security because it's a general hospital facility. And I'm sure that they are very much more capable of that than a small private psych hospital. So setting can make a big difference. When you have a staff call and there's no, especially on the 11 to 7 shift, because I work overnight, it's like, and there are only 12 of us in the building and some big dude goes off, well, I have to leave 2 staff on every unit. So like take away 6 out of 12 and it's me and 6 people, trying to contain this person, that's, people are going to get hurt. The police come sometimes because that's what we have to do. It's not something we typically do, but in that case, this was such a violent person and so big that it was the only way for us to contain him. And even they got sick of it, and they just took him back to the ED and said, find him another place because he's too. And to be honest with you, Sheila, the nurse in the emergency room, she seemed very young and very sweet. And she called me and said, well, we're just looking for a little more information, which I provided for her. And she said, well, I said to her, look, please tell me you don't just have some poor innocent sitter sitting outside this guy's room. I said, he will chew them up and spit them out in a heartbeat without you ever knowing that it's coming. Well, we have security. I said, are they standing at the doorway? Because if they are not, your sitter is going to get hurt. Well, it's across from the nurse's station. I said, he has already come up and over the gate into our nurse's station multiple times. That will not stop him. I said, I'm trying to say to you, you need to understand this is a dangerous person. Please don't leave this person sitting alone. Any nurse that's sitting in the nurse's station is going to be assaulted. I promise you. So the best that you can do sometimes is to say to somebody, fair warning, nothing that you have in place right now is going to protect you from this man. Just prepare yourself. Because, we have this and that. It's like, you're not hearing me. It was really frustrating. You're not hearing me. Nothing that you have in place there is going to stop him. We already had him on a 2-to-1. He was assaulting everybody around him. He was diving over the desk into the nurse's station. The police were 8 police came one time to try to control this guy. I just want to say your staff there is not safe. Nurse to nurse, I'm trying to warn you. You're not safe with what you have in place. Did they listen to me? Probably not. But all you can do is try. And that particular person was violent, but they were very much aware of what they were doing. They also had a level of psychosis, but there was a part of them that was very much aware of what they were doing. Not every psychotic person intends to do some of the things. They get wrapped up in their paranoia. This particular individual was just a very angry man, and was a little bit nuts on top of it, and it just was a very dangerous combination. I guarantee you he went off in the emergency room, and he was there for several days. They were trying to find him a placement. They ended up sending him to one of their sister facilities, who I'm sure was not thrilled, but they had to get him out of the emergency room. Right. And that's the other thing that sometimes happens. If you're affiliated with other hospitals, sometimes you're the recipient of the lateral handoff out of someone else's ED, because your corporate entity has decreed that this person will leave this ED and you are who's going to take them, whether you want to or not. I mean, working in a private facility means we're not subject to that, but DMH can also do what's called sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say DMH can do what they call an expedited admission. If there's someone who's been languishing in an ER and no inpatient facilities have accepted them for whatever reason, DMH can come knocking at your door and saying, we are expediting this patient into your facility. And sometimes, that's what happens. They get expedited into wherever it is that DMH has decided they're going to expedite them into to get them out of the emergency room. There have been times when legitimately then our administration has had to say that's not going to happen because we're not in a position to take this person at this time. But certainly they're, in that way, when the units are really acute, administration can be very helpful and very supportive. Other times, if DMH comes knocking at the door and says they're going to expedite somebody in, it's like we have to take some of the expedited people that are coming our way. So, but that can also change the entire tenure, it's sort of like the feel of a facility. When you have one person like that going off continuously, the whole hospital is tense and everybody feels it. And the other patients are always aware of it because they keep seeing the staff running down the hallway and they hear the codes being announced. So it makes a big difference.
It does make a big difference, and it puts a lot of apprehension on the staff and the patients.
Sure,
because
everybody's tense.
The patient doesn't just assault the staff. Don't they assault each other?
Sure, sometimes, absolutely.
And that's hard. I mean, especially if you don't have enough male staff, or I don't know if you, count their muscles or what they do as, because you can't get somebody that is frightened to go after somebody. I mean, the nurses I all worked with, they, none of us were, I don't know if you can say that we were more stupid than we were afraid. We would get right in the middle of it, and with security, because some of them they get this power, and you don't expect this extra adrenaline push, and this is what is so frightening. If you don't understand that you could be in danger, and it sounds like the nurse that you were talking about, he could have been just kind of winning her over, and that happens a lot. The violent
spit on you, mean? No, he was already in 4 points. He just sat up and spit in her face.
Oh, well, that would be a good warning.
You know what? I mean, that's happened to me before. I've had a patient sit up in restraints and spit and wads. It just will be like hanging in my hair, and I'd be like, "Oh, I want to kill you right now, but okay, I understand you're ill. You just have to kind of bite down on it and walk away when you are able to walk away." But spit is it's one of their weapons. I mean, they threaten us all the time. I have HIV. I'm going to spit on you, and we're all going to have HIV. And it's like, okay, probably not, but all right, you do what you got to do. So.
Right. That used to be a terrible threat at one time, and now it's not going to give you the COVID. It's like that's a big threat.
I'm just like, all right, I'm fully vaccinated. You do what you got to do. But sure. I mean, I think, again, sometimes you don't really know what the delusions are that are going on in their head because they haven't spoken to it. Now, there is someone that we're currently, as I said, restrained 10 times a weekend ago, who is just very sick, very, very ill, a lot of trauma issues, and sees one of the perpetrators in the room with them, and is very paranoid, although obviously they're not there. But that is just driving this level of impulsive, acting out all over the place behavior. They're running from, you don't even know what's going on in this person's mind. They're just so very ill. It's someone that we've had before, never has been this bad, but in this instance, it's just almost uncontrollable. Although I will say, the last shift I worked was Sunday night, overnight, and we chased this person up and down the hall and, corralled him and sat with him and talked with him and played music with him and all this kind of stuff, trying so very hard not to have to restrain him, give him shots. And then, he did take some oral medications or whatever. And then all of a sudden by 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, he was like off and running, paranoid, threatening one of the LPNs, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill you. He was behind a door with a glass window. He had gone into the TV lounge. It's obviously plexiglass, it's not glass, and just standing there calling her by name and saying, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill you. It's like, and none of us were afraid of him. It was just a matter of trying to figure out what can we do to try to help this person maintain control, not hurt himself, not hurt anybody else. In the meantime, there's a manic patient on the unit who's very invested in getting in the middle of all of this. It's like other people's attention has to be directed to the other patients on the unit. Please, can you step away? And it's like, you people don't know what you're doing. You don't know how to de-escalate him. I can help him. And he's calling this patient. I'm like, could you please step away? Because, so it's like you're never just one-on-one with this patient. There are 21 other patients on the unit while we're trying to deal with them, and many of them are in bed. But the one who's manic and doesn't sleep all night keeps inserting himself in the middle of the process. Now you have a situation where that person could also escalate. They could also end up needing to be restrained. It can snowball if you can't finesse the situation. It can snowball really quickly. And again, it's an overnight shift. There's just me and a handful of people, 4 of us basically running around trying to keep this person under control.
And they know it.
Didn't have to restrain him. There's a part of him that understood. He just was so gone in his delusional mind that, it's really hard to know what he was making out of the fact that we were following him everywhere he went. But,
well, in talking to some of the psych nurses and the BEST team that I mentioned, that I absolutely adored the BEST team. They were so kind and so patient. But they used to, they would evaluate a patient and then they'd say, right now he's being tortured or she's being tortured.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I thought that was kind of something that we don't, when I was working in the ER, I was never, that word alone really didn't come up very often. So when I heard it the first time, I kind of went, whoa. Now you have to step back and say, okay, put yourself into that type of category. And that makes it really, really difficult.
It's one of the ways that I work with the staff that is less experienced in psych when they're grousing about somebody or whatever. And I say, let me ask you a question. I said, how would you like to wake up in their brain every day? It's like, look at them. Look at what's happening to them. Would you want to wake up in that head every day? I had an outpatient one time who used to mutter and talk, and you'd see him walking up and down the streets of the city where I was working and muttering and talking and carrying on. I said to him, asked him about it one day, and he explained to me, he was a nice Jewish kid, at that point he was probably in his mid to late 20s or whatever, and I just said, so what, what happens? What's that like for you? And he said, I talk to Jesus all the time. He said he's a nice guy, but he just won't ever shut up. He just talks. So it's like his experience was that he had the voice of Jesus Christ in his head nonstop, 24/7, no relief. He was in the day treatment program where I was working. He was on his meds. We were doing everything that we could. We gave him support, activities, all kinds of things. It's like, but Jesus was just not going to let go of this guy, and he just had it nonstop, 24/7. This person that he identified as Jesus, this voice that he was hearing, was torturing him because he's a nice guy, but he just won't shut up. I don't care how nice somebody is. If you can't ever get him to shut up and you can't get away from the sound of their voice, that's torture.
That is torture. And that's so many patients. And if we had in the emergency room, I feel as though even though we had the BEST team, that would take time, maybe 10, 15 minutes to teach us and the psychiatric nurses, but we never really had the type of education from the psych department to actually teach us to be smart, safe, and really know what we were doing with psychiatric patients. Now, the word torture was that was an eye-opener to me. And just you explaining that, is that you can understand it, because sometimes a couple of my friends get on a little jag that they have to keep talking, and I can imagine, 15, 20 minutes of listening to that, you want to basically shoot them.
Yep.
And if maybe, maybe someday the psych department or people that know a lot about psychiatric experience. Oh, just quickly, when I'm saying that, I remember I was working at this other detox that was psych and detox, and they would have the psychiatric patients in there, and I went to a conference, and there was a psychiatrist that was giving us a talk, and I found that very interesting because I didn't know much about psychiatry. Mm-hmm. But he had these expressions, and I'm thinking to myself, what is he doing? Why is he moving his lips like this, and why does his tongue keep coming out and his eyes on, and wouldn't be all the time. And what he was teaching us, what he found out afterwards, he said, I'm really surprised that some of you nurses that I know what's going on with me has not said one word. I didn't know what he was talking about. And what it is the side effects. The medication.
Yeah, he was mimicking
really
tardive dyskinesia. Yeah.
Yeah, and I
picked it up as soon as you mentioned it. It's like funny.
It's what he wanted to do is teach us, and well, I certainly learned. But if you get somebody that is having, somebody talking to you 24 hours a day, then you have a side effect of the medications that you can't control. I mean, how would we all feel like that?
Well, sure.
And so, with education,
particularly if what you're hearing in your head is someone saying horrible, mean, terrible. Now, this person I talked to you about, he had Jesus making conversation. Some of them believe they have Satan and other dark forces that are saying horrible things to them, telling them to kill other people, telling them you're worthless, you're a piece of crap, kill yourself. So it's like if you have that in your head nonstop, particularly those people are out to get you. And I have to say, social media now gets wrapped up into their delusional systems on a regular basis. The person that we were struggling with so much the past couple of weeks is very much got it, and it's been a delusion that has been part of his process every time we've had him, but it's just more enhanced this time around. People are talking about him and posting it all on their Facebook pages, and it's all out there in the cyberspace now. And he's extremely paranoid about all things Facebook and cyberspace, and he's one of many that we see now that are very, very, very clear that in their life they see that the internet and social media it's all wrapped up into their delusional system. And instead of it just being thought broadcasting, now not only is it my thoughts are being broadcast, but now it's like, and it's going out all over the world on the internet. And that's all very much wrapped up in what's happening now, and it's contributing on many levels to their psychotic process, because you hear about the internet every single day. There's always something in the news about this person did a tweet about this, or this person did an Instagram, or that person, so it's like in their mind, everything that's going on in their paranoid world is also out there on the internet, and that just increases their levels of paranoia 1,000-fold sometimes.
Right.
And that's, we can't control for that anymore. Like it contributes to a lot of what happens now. Same as what happened right after 9/11. We had so many psychotic patients who came in there that were terrified because they were sure that planes were going to be flying into the building and that the terrorists were after them and that we were all terrorists. And it took a long time to get past that, but the internet is like a part of everybody's everyday life now. It's like we're not going to get past it, and it's contributing to the suffering of a lot of people with mental health issues.
It is. And what do you think the pandemic has done?
Well, interestingly enough, we were sort of wondering about, how how many of our patients coming and going would be vaccinated? A lot of them actually are. They've gone and gotten themselves vaccinated, or they're in a setting where their outpatient providers have encouraged it or what have you. So I was actually rather impressed. And we have had outbreaks within the patient population ever since COVID happened, like the first really significant one. I mean, remember, we're only a 70-bed facility, but we had 14 patients in isolation at one point in time. And that becomes tricky when you have psych patients who the vast majority of their treatment is participating in groups and stuff like that, and now they're in a room by themselves for, at that point, 10 days. And how do we continue to try to engage with them when they're behind a door that they can't come out of? So it's, we've given them DVD players if they were people who were safe to have them. We give them, a portable phone, all kinds of things to try to keep them, busy and active. But it's tough, because the general population of psych patients, when they're in inpatient settings, they're treated in what's called the, therapeutic milieu, which means they're out and about in the day area and going to groups. And it's really hard to do that when you're behind a closed door.
Right. That really makes it difficult. Well, we're coming to the end of our conversation today, Joan, but any helpful hints you can give just, other nurses or people that work with psych or have psych people in their family?
Well, again, I guess for me, the thing that's always been there are a couple of things that I try to teach the staff that I'm working with. The first thing, as I've told you before, is imagine waking up in this person's head every day. If you see what they're doing, you're seeing what's going on with them. It's like, think about that. Would you want that going on in your head every day, and try to have some level of compassion or understanding? It's like sometimes it seems they're very deliberately doing things, and sometimes that can be true, but like, just try to take a look at them, take a step back, because sometimes you're too close to the situation, especially if it's someone in your family, but, sometimes you need to take a step back and say, what is this person really going through? Just that first and foremost, try to put yourself in their shoes, because it's a horrible place to be. And it doesn't matter the nature of their mental illness. I mean, whether it's a substance abuse situation, and nobody wakes up in the morning and says, today I want to be a fentanyl addict. Somehow life has gotten them there many times. Even people who work in psych will blame people with addictions. You did this to yourself. Like, well, we just had a patient who was admitted who had ovarian cancer and was also treated successfully for a form of leukemia. Now, what do you think they gave this person, post-cancer? Well, she got given opiates, just given Percocet. She got addicted, and when there was no more Percocet prescription, she turned to heroin. So it's like, what am I going to say to this woman? You went through two horrible, potentially lethal diseases. You got hooked on opiates as a secondary effect of that. Should I then turn around and say, well, you did this to yourself? It's like, no. What you choose to do going forward, sure, that's your responsibility. But we tend to blame people with mental health issues and addiction issues. It's like, try to put that blame card away and try to see what's the circumstance that brought a person there in the first place. And I just think that we skip that step a lot. We just jump immediately to blaming.
I think you're right. A lot of times that, especially if it's the patient comes in a second time or a third time, and it's not only for addiction, and it's not only for psych patients. It's for a lot of the patients that show up. They should do this and they should do that, and why aren't they doing it, and so forth and so on.
I would challenge any person who has that, mindset. It's like, you take these medications that they're taking and you tell me how you feel. There's a reason they don't want to stay on them. It's like someone just poured cement on your brain. And yes, even though it helps sort of like knit your thought process back together again, they look normal to us from the outside, but in their head, they don't feel normal. And that's a huge disconnect between practitioners who are administering these medications. It's like, okay, we get them so they act like normal people, what we would define as normal people. But if you really talk to them, they don't feel normal in their brain. That stuff does things to the inside of their brain that they can function better, but they feel completely off, you know?
Right.
And then they get the other side effects that go along with it. It's like they're never going to stay on these meds because they make them feel crappy. They gain weight, whatever. And then they would have to acknowledge they have a mental illness. And 90% of the time, the stigma that's attached to having a mental illness still exists in the world. And nobody wants to say they have a mental illness.
Right.
You know? And
right.
So it's always going to be an uphill battle, but first and foremost, just compassion. Just understand they are suffering. They are being tortured by this. You wouldn't want to be them. Trust me. You know, you would not want to be in that situation and having to live the life that they have to live. And the thing is, there's no out for them. There's no cure. You know, even an addict in recovery is an addict in recovery for the rest of their life. And, you know, the knife of relapse is hanging over their head at all times. You know, anybody who has one of the major mental illnesses, there's no end in sight. There's no cure for that. They don't know what's causing it. All you can do is throw drugs at the symptoms, but you can't make it go away for them. So it's like it's an endless cycle that never ends for them. So, like, who wants to live that way? You know?
I know. And that's what is so frustrating. That, you know, you get somebody that has a psychiatric or a mental illness, and the medication seems to be doing okay. So, you let your guard down. You say, okay, he's on the right medication, and then it starts with, I don't feel the right way. I don't like the way this medicine is.
I don't like the way it makes me feel. You hear it constantly. I don't like the way it makes me feel. So we take a look at them and we say, wow, they look normal. But it's not normal. It doesn't feel normal to them. Because a lot of people get frustrated and say they won't stay on these medications. It's like, well, you take it for a while and see how you like it. It's like they're powerful medications. They don't feel right on them. You know?
Right. All of these things play in. Well, I'm going to say thank you to you, Joan. And what I will, hopefully you'll be able to come on again to help us out, to listen to what it's like to have mental illness. And I want to thank Lillian Caldwell. She's the CEO of Passionate World Talk Radio, and Jeannie White, station manager. And so I am going to sign off right now, and we will talk later.
Are you looking for an internet talk radio station for your podcast? Look no further. At the helm of Passionate World Talk Radio are two women that want to provide a spot for you and your podcast to be heard. There are many other places for your podcast, but PWTR has the audience. You will not be disappointed. Our station has been on the internet for the past 16 years. Call us for more information. 484-364-1032 or text Jeannie White, station manager, at THECONNECTSHOW@gmail.com for podcast show details. Thank you for listening to Passionate World Talk Radio. You can listen to this program all over again by going over to https://passionateworldtalkradio.com. You can also hear it on Spotify, Spreaker, Amazon Alexa, AMFM247.com every Tuesday evening between 8 and 9 p.m. YouTube, Facebook Live, LinkedIn, and all the other podcast directories one can find on the internet.